All right, so welcome to chapter 32, where we're going to talk about the deuterostome animals. Okay, so there's actually three groups in the deuterostomes. There are the, let me get my pen, echinoderms, a group known as the chordates, that actually encompasses all three of these, and a group called the hemichordates. We are only going to talk about the echinoderms and the chordates. We're not going to talk about the hemichordates in this chapter, so you can skip the hemichordate part. So this group, the deuterostomes, so echinoderms and chordates, have several early developmental patterns in common. The first of which, well, it's not necessarily the first thing that happens, but kind of the primary of which, and that this is where the name deuterostome comes from, is that the blastopore is going to become the anus. So remember that blastopore, that opening we get when gastrulation occurs, that will become the anus, and then a secondary opening at the other end will be the mouth. The deuterostomes also all develop via radial cleavage, although radial cleavage is not unique to the deuterostome, so this isn't necessarily a super awesome trait to use to group them together. Another thing they have in common developmentally is that their coelom is going to develop from these little mesodermal pockets that bud off the endodermal cavity rather than by the splitting of the mesoderm as occurs in protostomes. Now, not all of these, particularly the cleavage, are great ways to unite this clade, but DNA evidence also strongly supports the deuterostomes as a group. So we are pretty comfortable saying that they are a clade that goes together. So we're going to start by surveying the echinoderms, and we're going to work our way through several echinoderm representatives, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the chordates, which we'll spend a lot of time on. Now, as I go through this, I am going to pause the video to write my notes because I want this video to not be 5 hours long. I'm sure you also want it to not be 5 hours long. And as we saw in previous videos, it eats a lot of time to write. So just to kind of try to keep these a little shorter for you, I'm going to pause. So what that means is when I hit pause, you're going to see for a quick second my whiteboard goes out of view, but it'll come back, I promise. So, okay, so here is phylum Echinodermata. So these are the sea stars, the sea urchins, and the sea daisies. These are slow-moving, sometimes sessile, but mostly slow-moving marine organisms. There's a couple of things that are special about this phylum, a couple of features we see. The first is they have an endoskeleton of calcareous plates. So these are sort of a system of calcified internal plates that lay underneath their epidermis, which usually has spines or bumps on it. Another thing that's unique about phylum Echinodermata is the water vascular system. So this water vascular system is a network of hydraulic canals that eventually branch into little structures called tube feet. And so they're powered by the seawater. So there's this opening at the top called the madreporite. And into this madreporite, seawater will flow. The seawater enters this structure called the ring canal. And this ring canal will branch off into into all 5 of the radial canals. And as you can see, these radial canals connect to each of these little structures called the tube feet. So they're sort of powered by water. The pressure of water or lack of pressure will cause these tube feet to change what they're doing. And so they're used both in locomotion and feeding, and we can see the opposite side of these tube feet over here. So really these are the, actually the name of the top part here is, so we can see the whole thing here in cross section, is the ampulla. And we actually have the, I guess what you would call the foot section down here. So we are going to be looking at the internal anatomy of the starfish, of the echinoderm that we would usually call the sea star or the starfish, in lab. We'll dissect one. So we're going to get more into the anatomy and focus on all these different little parts. So don't worry if you're looking at this and you're like, blah, we will go over it. So a couple of other things. These organisms, although you might look at it and say that has radial symmetry, it doesn't. It's actually considered bilaterally symmetrical. It is a special kind of bilateral symmetry we refer to as pentaradial symmetry, but this is considered a subtype of bilateral symmetry. So as adults, they exhibit this pentaradial symmetry, and if you look, they're not actually they have different structures on different sides, right? This madrepori is not on all the sides, right? It's not like we have 5 of these, so that if we split it 5 different ways, it would look the same. It's not exactly the same. And not only that, but during the larval stage, there is clear bilateral symmetry. So a couple things there. Another thing to know about phylum Echinodermata is that we don't say, or because it doesn't really have an anterior or a posterior, or what we also don't call it having a dorsal or ventral side. What we say is that it has an oral side where the mouth is, right? And an aboral side where the anus is. So what you would think of as the top-facing surface is the aboral side where we see the anus. And you can't really see it here because it's facing down, but the mouth on the oral side would be at the bottom. So there are 5 classes of echinoderms that we're going to go over. And I know this seems like a lot, and it kind of is, but we're going to be looking at all of these in lab, so you kind of need to bite the bullet and commit these names to memory. So we have the Asteroidea, which are our sea stars and our sea daisies. The class Ophiuroidea, which are known as brittle stars, kind of similar looking to a sea star, but with longer arms. The Echinoidea, these are sea urchins and sand dollars. The Crinoidea, which are sea lilies and feather stars, which are likely organisms you've maybe not seen before. And the Holothuriidea, which are the sea cucumbers. Okay, so class Asteroidea. So these would include things like the sea star that we also sometimes just call the starfish. So the basic body plan of the Asteroidea is that we have a central disc, and arms, if they're present, radiate outward. We have tube feet on the oral side that allow it to creep around, and they typically feed on bivalves by grasping onto them. So bivalve, by the way, that would be like a clam or a mussel or something like that. Grasping on and sort of prying their shell just open enough. And they actually do this kind of gross but kind of really cool thing where they will evert their stomach into their mantle cavity and of the bivalve and secrete digestive juices. So I found a video. Now this is in a aquarium, and so but you can see the stomach everting. So someone's going to drop some food pieces to this sea star, and we'll see it evert its stomach out to capture them. So it's pretty cool. And there goes its stomach. So you can imagine if this guy was maybe clamped onto a mussel or something, it could squeeze its stomach, in between even a pretty small little opening in order to get the digestive juices and digest that sucker. So kind of a nifty little trick there. So here are our classic, oops, that's not what I meant to do. Our classic things that we think of as sea stars, and of course there's a lot of diversity depending on the species you're talking about, but we also have these little organisms that we call the sea daisies. They are armless. They're little disc-shaped, 5-sided with this little small spine, or rather this little fringe kind of around the edges. They typically live on submerged wood and just absorb nutrients from their substrate. Okay, so here's our class Ophiuroidea. So kind of similar looking to the Asteroidea, but they have clearly much larger arms and a really distinct central disc. They also lack the flattened surface of the tube feet, so when they move, they typically do it rather than by their tube feet. They will thrash their arms around in a coordinated movement or coordinated motion to kind of allow a swimming type situation. Some species are suspension feeders, some are predators, and some are scavengers. Alright, so the class Echinoidea are the sea urchins and the sand dollars. Okay, so Echinoidea, sea urchins, and sand dollars. So these guys don't have any arms, as you might have noticed. They do have 5 rows of tube feet for movement. And many of them have long spines, like this organism here. You can see these spines, that they're able to pivot with muscle contraction, and that is something that can help them move around too. You can't really see it very well at all here, but their mouth is ringed with jaws for eating seaweed or for scraping algae. They also might capture, plankton or something like that. The urchins are spherical, kind of like a pincushion, whereas the sand dollars are much more flattened. The class Crinoidea are the sea lilies and the feather stars, which are really quite beautiful organisms. The organisms we call the sea lilies, so this would be an example, of a sea lily. You can kind of see why. These are sessile. They'll be anchored in one spot, whereas these organisms, known as the feather stars, are mobile. They will sort of crawl around with these little flexible extensions here. They are suspension feeders, and they have arms that are going to surround a mouth that's on the dorsal or backside of what you think of as, I guess, the top of the organism. And one thing that's kind of interesting about these organisms is that the ones alive today are actually remarkably similar to fossils that are 500 million years old. So these organisms have remained largely unchanged for a very, very long period of time. Alright, and finally is our class Holothuriidea. So these are the sea cucumbers. So these have an appearance that is quite different than all other echinoderms. They lack the spiny skin, their endoskeleton is highly reduced, and they are typically elongate rather than being flattened dorsoventrally, like a starfish, right? It looks like it's been flattened in a book or something. They do, however, have the 5 rows of tube feet like all other echinoderms. So these guys are really interesting. They're the tube feet near the anterior end of the organism can be modified into large sticky tentacles that can be protruded from the mouth, and the organism can then digest material that adheres to those tentacles. When it pulls them back in, it can, remove that material. Another thing this organism is capable of doing is expelling its guts here out of its anus in order to confuse predators. And it actually, if it loses a piece of this in the process, it can actually regrow it. So that's a pretty impressive trick, if you ask me. Okay, so that brings us to the chordates. So that ends our survey of the echinoderms. We're going to start with the chordates. We're going to take a break, and we'll start with the chordates in the next video. So see you soon.